Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on part two, highlighting strategies to support equitable practices in literacy, California's commitment to Black student success. I am Dr. Bonnie Garcia, statewide literacy co-director with the California Department of Education, and it's a privilege to be with you today. I want to thank those who are returning to part two and also those who are new to this little mini series of our larger 2526 literacy informational webinar series. I'd also like to introduce my co-lead in all of this work, Nancy.
I'm happy to be with you. I'm Nancy Brynelson, co-director of statewide literacy, along with Bonnie Garcia, and it's my privilege to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Nancy will be joining us again in just a bit. I want to start with our agenda today, what it is that we're going to be doing. And what we're going to first get to jump into is hearing from commendable speakers that I am just so excited to be able to introduce you to. We will then move into how is California moving the needle on student achievement in literacy. And we did a little dive in part one. So, a deeper dive in part one, and today we're going to have a small recap. Then we're going to dive into a deep, rich, and meaningful panel discussion with two national leading experts. We're going to have time for Q&A, so please make sure you put your questions in the Q&A option at the bottom. We will be collecting those questions and answering those at a later time. And we also will have resources that are shared at the very end and throughout the webinar in the chat. In fact, in just a bit, you're going to receive the handout that has the resources for today, including today's presentation slides. So now that we know what we're going to be doing, let's talk about what we're going to walk away with. And we're going to begin with best practices and key considerations for equitable screening, assessment, and instructions that specifically address the needs of Black and African American students, as well as culturally responsive approaches that improve literacy outcomes for Black and African American students, and the system-level supports and equity-focused strategies that are needed to implement these strategies and approaches within a multi-tiered system of support. Now, to kick us off, I have the honor of introducing you to Helena Donato Sapp, who will provide a California student lens on the importance of uplifting equitable literacy practices for Black and African American students. Helena is a 16-year-old scholar, an activist, a keynote speaker, a poet who believes in the power of youth voice and uses her own in the work of equity and justice. She's an accomplished activist and an educator who is internationally recognized for her work in disability justice. In fact, she was just on the New York Times. She has been the Poet Laureate of the National Institutes for Historically Underserved Students since 2019 and was the Long Beach Youth Poet Laureate in 24-25. She is a commissioner for Long Beach's Commission for Women and Girls and is also newly appointed to the California Department of Education's Advisory Commission for Special Education. And yes, please emoji this up because we're about to hear really exceptional remarks from Helena Donato Sapp, who I will now turn it over to. Helena?
My name is Helena Donato Sapp, and I'm a 16-year-old junior in high school. I appreciate being invited to add a student perspective today. My positionality is that I am a Black disabled girl who was adopted at birth by two fathers. And I have 4 non-apparent learning disabilities. My intersectional identities matter when we are talking about literacy, because each of my identities impact how I approach literature, whether or not I might find success in literacy, and end up shaping my experiences with equitable practices. Because of my multiply marginalized identities, school isn't always a safe and supporting environment for me. So if there is any form of literacy I want to discuss with you, it would be what I term the literacy of resistance and the literacy of self-advocacy. Resistance has made my literacy stronger. Some educators viewed me through a deficit lens and only interacted with me as a problem body and a problem mind. I resist that and advocate for an asset-based approach that views me as a worthy body and a worthy mind. I cannot emphasize enough to guardians that coaching your child to be a powerful self-advocate is an important form of literacy. As a young Black girl, I was drawn to books that featured Blackness. I wanted heroes with dark black skin and perfect kinky locks like my own. In elementary school, I rarely had Blackness represented in what school gave me to read. And again, my resistance made my literacy stronger. I believe that a student act of resistance is to use our literacy skills to name what we are experiencing in school life and write about it as youth scholars. In middle school, I published a 90-page peer-reviewed research journal article on decolonizing my elementary education and pointed out the anti-Blackness I experienced in grades 1 to 5. That article was read by the majority of my elementary teachers, and it changed how they teached and what they asked kids to read. I think that part of literacy we must I think that the part of literacy we must give students is the literacy of resistance. Child and youth activists know we can make real change happen. I am an award-winning youth poet laureate who has won multiple titles through Urban Word and the National Youth Poet Laureate Program. Think Amanda Gorman. Poetry has helped me with my literacy as well with my writing, my confidence, my public speaking, my agency, and my activism around my intersectional identities. I fell in love with June Jordan and Maya Angelou and Bell Hooks and 100 other Black poets, and now I join their ranks as a published activist poet. I have a lot to say about literacy and a lot to say about supporting equitable practices. But for right now, I would emphasize empowering students to have voice and agency. Literacy can't be done in a vacuum, and it needs to be done in ways that show that we have agency. Since I am a poet, I will end with a poem I recently wrote that captures another element of how to engage us in literacy. I've been taught to always speak and write from the most vulnerable place, and that vulnerability is the way to connection. If educators and guardians want us to engage with literacy, then we must be taught to write our truths out as agents of change. This poem is titled Shame Whispers to Me. Shame whispers to me, hide that, keep it secret. Don't tell anyone. Don't write about it. Don't take that shameful thing and write it beautiful. And that is my cue to shout that secret out loud. Make a speech about it. Look people right in the eyes and say what shame would have had me hide. To write the words out on paper and make it beautiful. Everything happens that is writable. But shame will whisper and whisper and whisper, not to speak about it. Don't you dare write that on paper. What if someone reads it? So it takes guts. Shame hands you self-doubt, but writing and speaking gives you power and strength. Every time, every single time when I shout shame's secret, people around me say, thank you. Me too. There are no secrets, only topics to write about. Thank you.
Helena, that was so beautiful. And you can see that I am not the only one who thinks the same. It was very inspiring. I know that others are feeling the same way, and I want to thank you for sharing your lens, your experience, your vision, and also for reading your poem and sharing that with us. I know that can be really personal when you share something that you write.
Mhm.
So, I understand you have to get back to class. Learning comes first. So we will respectfully let you go. But again, I want to thank you for your voice. And I'm looking forward to the day that I actually get to meet you in person. For those who want to know more about Helena, there is her information in the handout as well as in the chat. Helena, thank you again for being with us, and we really appreciate you. I will see you soon, and I'm sure we'll all see you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So that was just wonderful and a great way to start our webinar today. It really challenges us to ensure that we are providing experiences for our students that allow them to grow into being their own agencies of voice and writers as well. I want to also take this brief opportunity to acknowledge our State Superintendent, Tony Thurman's leadership and his vision for ensuring that all of our students are reading by third grade and beyond. Because of his efforts and support, this work, which Nancy and I will speak it to in just a bit, has been possible. But before we get into that, I'd like to first introduce our Deputy Superintendent, Will McGee, at the California Department of Education. Deputy McGee oversees the Building Educational Success Together branch, which oversees programs that promote improved student achievement. These programs include statewide student assessment, school and district interventions, state and federal accountability, as well as collection and reporting of educational data. Deputy McGee, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate it. And I am just excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Uh, I first want to just say, mic drop, webinar over. Helena was off the hook. And I will tell you that I definitely am going to be rewatching this webinar after it comes out. So greetings on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. As Dr. Garcia mentioned, my name is William McGee, and I am the proud Deputy Superintendent of the BEST branch. BEST stands for Building Educational Success Together at the Department of Education. And I'm excited to be here to really talk about this topic. Superintendent Thurman really started us off at the California Department of Education on our Black Student Achievement Initiative. And as you heard from Helena talking about decolonizing my elementary school education, I definitely want to read that project that she wrote. And literacy as resistance, very important. And we're here today to talk about literacy as a foundation for the opportunity, empowerment, and lifelong success of all students, in particular, our Black students. So we thank you for joining today's webinar as we acknowledge California's progress in literacy, and we are especially encouraged at the gains that our Black students have shown. We know that the gains that our Black children have shown are meaningful. However, we recognize that there's still much work to be done. So this workshop, this webinar, highlighting strategies to support equitable practices in literacy, California's commitment to Black student success, is part 2 of a series. And we're excited that the California Department of Education will be hosting a series of webinars slated toward Black student achievement. So please stay tuned for that. If we can have the slide up, I would like to show you all about the Black Student Achievement Initiative. Some of you may be familiar with this slide. In October of 2021, State Superintendent Thurman called for a convening of a task force to support Black student achievement. And at the department, I'm proud to say that the work is still continuing. We are moving on with this work. So the Black Student Achievement platform, or excuse me, Black Student Achievement Initiative has 3 points to it. A platform to share resources, highlighting the good work that's happening in California schools that are replicable for all LEAs or school districts, administering funding sources, an opportunity for LEA school districts to learn about how funding is being administered and how to leverage funding, and then legislation, talking about legislation that can be proposed and presented to support Black students and their work. I know as a former teacher and principal, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue such as this. So I'm excited at the webinar series, and I thank Dr. Garcia, I thank Nancy, and I thank our California Department of Education team for bringing this webinar to us. I know that you are going to enjoy it, and please utilize these webinars during your professional development. Parents and guardians, please utilize this webinar to support the work that you're doing in helping your children at school. With that, I say thank you, Happy New Year, and please continue to learn.
Thank you, Will. It is always energizing when we get to hear from you, and definitely a great segue to our next agenda item on how is California moving the needle on student achievement. This is going to be brief as we have shared this in part one, but an important recap to reinforce the importance of this webinar. And I will now turn it over to Nancy Brennelson, who will get us started.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Moving the needle on student achievement and literacy takes a lot of effort on many people's parts, but we started with State Superintendent Thurman's Reading by Third Grade and Beyond initiative, which aims to ensure biliteracy and literacy for all students in California. It requires a comprehensive approach and a comprehensive and coherent set of systems at the state, local educational agency, and school site. I'd like to highlight a few. Next slide. We are fortunate in the statewide literacy office at the California Department of Education to provide resources through our California Literacy webpage. And the very first two paragraphs of that webpage really lay out our vision for how we teach and how we support students in literacy. Let me just share with you a few highlights. First of all, our approach builds on decades of research, including the science of reading and literacy, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and language. Also, the science of learning and development responsive to our culturally and linguistically rich student population. It promotes sequenced literacy instruction, practice, intervention, and meaningful application across English language arts, English language development, and all content areas. It values developing knowledge and skills in English language arts and other disciplines. Provides access to joyful, motivating, linguistically and culturally affirming, and developmentally appropriate literacy experiences. And integrates foundational literacy instruction, phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, print concepts with oral language, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, speaking, and listening. Provides integrated and designated English language development for all children who are identified, all students identified as English learners, with opportunities for all students to develop biliteracy. It provides supplemental and intensified literacy supports for students as needed within a multi-tiered system of support framework. And finally, these densely packed paragraphs also offer, next slide please, an admonition to monitor and progress and outcomes within a coherent and effective system. The investments in literacy over the last few years have been substantial. Just enumerating a few here: Golden State Literacy Plan from the governor, AB 1454, which is new legislation this year addressing a number of items, including credentialing for administrators and specialists, and many other requirements, screening, opportunities for professional development, and more. We are thrilled that we have seen 1.8 percentage points growth over in ELA literacy on our state test, the CASP, from 23-24 to 24-25, and it wasn't without a lot of hard work. But achievement is still not where we would hope, especially for specific populations, and as we focus on Black or African American students today. Our task now is to support school districts and schools as they strengthen their systems, and you see in this graphic, to plan and develop programs to provide best first instruction and tiered supports for learning for all.
Thank you, Nancy.
And thank you, Bonnie.
You know what I realized that we left off is literacy coaches and reading specialists as well. It's a huge initiative in our state.
Huge initiative. We have too many to list here, but there are opportunities for schools and school districts to benefit from the resources we have. And the handout that we have provided for you, the link in the chat, will enumerate information about all of these.
Appreciate you, Nancy.
Thank you, Bonnie.
I'm going to spend just a bit of time recapping on two data points that were shared in part one. The first being this slide here on CASP data, for CASP ELA data by race and ethnicity that shows the percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding standard. Now, there's a lot that you can take away from this slide, but I'm going to point you to a few specific points of the data that pertain to today's topic. First, as you can see here, we between 24 and 25 across the board, all groups have shown improvement. We also see that there are some groups who have actually exceeded the state average, which, as Nancy just shared, and as you see here, was 1.8 percentage point gains. And that one of those groups includes our Black and African American students, who also demonstrated, in addition to exceeding the state average, demonstrated the largest year-to-year gain by 2.4 percentage points. However, even with these gains, we continue to see significant disparities. And we also see that we are not back to pre-pandemic levels, and we don't just want to get back there because that still wasn't, those levels are still not where we want to be. And we want to make sure that we're exceeding those levels. This data point illustrates the percentage of students with disabilities by race and ethnicity for 24-25. Shown here is the percentage of each group within the overall student population. Also compared to the percentage of students and percentage of each group in overall student population with an IEP. Now, when you look at both of those percentages side by side, we see that there is an overrepresentation of our Black and African American students identified with disabilities. Although Black and African American students make up 4.9% of the overall student population, they account for 6.85% of all students with an IEP. There is much more data that we could dig into, but these are two data sets that make it very clear that disparities continue and improvement is imperative. Which brings us to today's purpose, taking away strategies, approaches that advance equity and expand access for all. To help ground this work, we're honored to be able to feature a panel discussion with two leading experts who will share best practices for equitable screening, assessment, and instruction, culturally responsive approaches, and system-level equity-focused strategies for implementing those practices and approaches within a multi-tiered system of support. As you listen, we invite you to take note of any insights that you glean, notice how you might implement them, and what might be some things that even the department could support you with implementation of what you're hearing today. Now, I've been waiting for this moment for years, actually, but just in the last couple months, I've had the opportunity to really connect with Dr. Julie Washington and Dr. Tracy White Whedon. And in just a bit, they are going to come on. I want to just share a few things about each of them. Dr. Julie Washington, as many of you might know, is a Dean of School of Education at the University of California, Irvine. She is a speech and language pathologist and also a fellow of the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, ASHA. Dr. Washington directs the California Learning Disabilities Research Innovation Hub at UCI and is also the director of Language Variation and Academic Success Lab. Her research is focused on the intersection of literacy, language variation, and poverty in African American children from preschool through grade 6. In particular, her work focuses on understanding the role of cultural dialect in assessment outcomes, identification of reading disabilities in school-aged African American children, and on disentangling the relationship between language production and comprehension and development of early reading and language skills for children growing up in poverty. Currently, she is working on development of assessment protocols for use with high-density dialect speakers that are designed to improve our ability to measure their linguistic competence and developing interventions to improve reading fluency and comprehension of African American children who speak dialect. This work is funded by the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, on the National Institutes of Health, and the American Education Research and Development Fund, respectively. We're very lucky to have Dr. Julie Washington with us. We also have Dr. Tracy White Whedon, a national keynote speaker and an educational change agent dedicated to creating equitable learning opportunities for over 40 years. With decades of experience in curriculum development, professional development, leadership development, strategic planning, she has spearheaded local and statewide initiatives that drive deep systemic change. Dr. White's work bridges research to practice, empowers educators, families, and strategic partners to support lifelong learning for all. Currently, White serves as the founder of Upstream Education for All, a nonprofit dedicated to transforming life outcomes for the marginalized in society by advancing the work of resolute nonprofit leaders who are defying the odds. The mission is rooted in the belief that education is a great equalizer. I just love that. And faith that it is possible to break generational cycles of disparity and create opportunity through strategic and united nonprofit collaborative action. Upstream provides nonprofit leaders with differentiated technical assistance and support that remove barriers and ignite organizational impact. And now, went too far. let me stop share there. Actually, now I'm going to ask our panelists to come on. Dr. Washington, Dr. White, thank you for being with us today and for the knowledge that I know you both are about to drop. And I want to make sure we have you both spotlighted. There we go. Okay. We have about 40 minutes to talk today, so I want to make sure that we get into it. And starting with the first question, and you both have done an extensive amount of work, you have expertise, understand the research, and even have done your own research. based on that research and your expertise, what are the major steps that you say that and believe are needed to achieve successful outcomes in literacy for our Black and African American students? And what I'm going to do is I'll start off with you, Dr. White. Dr. White.
All right, thank you, Bonnie. It's such an honor to be here this evening, and I do want to ask you all to join me from the lens of a practitioner because I'm a recovering high school English and theater arts teacher, as I like to say, and I lean into the research of great researchers like Dr. Washington. My work has been about scaling the work in urban settings and helping superintendents and State Department leaders determine how to advance best practices and proven practices. So I'd say the big piece here is that when we are allowing the science or the evidence to drive what we're trying to do, one of the most important things is to map what we're currently doing. One of the hard things for leaders to do is to pause, get off of the hamster wheel of initiative overload and unpack the three variables they actually have control over. And those three are the use of time. We all get 24 hours in a day. Talent. I was so happy to hear about literacy coaches, for example, and funding. Because at times we will think that we don't have enough funding or time or talent, but it's that we need to repurpose what we have available. And at times we need to strategically abandon things that are not serving us well. Effectively, when we plan for the right work and we work that plan, we prevent educator failure. How can we prevent student failure if we don't prevent educator failure? And that goes back to how we are apprenticed to win at our work. So I think about folks who are fortunate to have a dean of instruction like a Dr. Washington, but not all universities are made alike. And too many are producing teachers based on a model that is not grounded in the science of what we know about implementation science, learning science, and the science of literacy. What does that have to do with Black students? Well, getting more granular is something that there's so much work to be done in. And that's why leaning into researchers with like Dr. Washington is so crucial because we can at times, because of a culture of racist, classist, low expectations for students, miss the opportunities to recognize what do we need to know about the performance of Black students when it comes to the language variety that they bring from home, which is an asset. So I want to pause there because I think that's a great flex to Dr. Washington, Bonnie, because in terms of more granular understanding of what that means and the implications for Black literacy, that is my colleague's expertise.
So that's a
Thank you.
great segue to you, Dr. Washington.
Thank you, Tracy,
Absolutely.
or Dr. Whedon. Sorry.
Just don't
Uh,
come here late for dinner.
I am happy to be here today. I am at UC Irvine. I have been in California for 5 years now. I got here during the pandemic in 2020, and I have worked in a lot of different contexts. And I know California to have a really special history as it relates to African American students, African American achievement, and especially African American literacy. There have been a lot of initiatives here that have informed my own work and informed the work of others who are interested in African American student literacy. And it is this year, 2026 is the 30th anniversary of the Ebonics debate, which happened in California, in Oakland. And it was 1996. And for some folks, it might not seem like it was that long ago, but it was. And it was, for those who don't know it, because I know there are some people in this room that are younger than I, the Ebonics debate was about the educators and researchers in Oakland real passing a resolution really trying to get researchers to consider the language that African American children bring to the classroom in literacy instruction and in teaching in the classroom in general. And that's where the term Ebonics comes from. Now, the term Ebonics actually is more a trade term. Most of us call it African American English. Some people call it African American Vernacular English, and that's what I study. The thing that I will say about that initiative was we know now, 30 years later, they were right, but they were premature. We have the science now that tells us that considering the cultural language that students bring to the classroom is really critical for assessing their competence and for teaching them to read. We've seen it in interventions, we see it in assessments. This notion that kids come to school, and especially kids who are growing up in poverty, we have this mistaken notion when kids come to school, they don't know anything. Au contraire, they know a lot. They are not blank slates. They have a lot of skills, talents, and abilities that we should be building on in the classroom when they get there. Every child comes to school, regardless of their race or ethnicity, come to school as experts in the language and practices of their own speech communities. They bring that expertise to school with them, and then we discard it.
Yeah.
And that's problematic. We saw it with kids who speak Spanish, and we've made much more progress we're making progress with kids who are bilingual. But the kids that we're talking about today are the ones we call bidialectal or multidialectal. So they speak varieties of English. One of the words that I have learned at UCI to use now from my students is English in the plural. There are
Hmm.
many Englishes, not just one. And in schools, we act like there's just one. There are many children, there's a lot of language, and there are many Englishes. And so respecting those Englishes when we are teaching children to read is one of the key elements. Because I have to say, and I have a number of things to say, but I'm not just going to keep going on. So I'll get a chance to say a few of them later. But the statement that you made earlier, Dr. Whedon, education is a great equalizer, I actually don't believe that. I think that education gives you the opportunity to achieve equality. Education in and of itself is not an equalizer because even a structure that's designed to equalize can be um, meted out in a way that is discriminatory and biased. But if you're educated, you have the opportunity to achieve equality. It doesn't automatically equalize because so many of the structures that we have in place are barriers to that equality. But if you have the education, if you have the literacy skills, you have the opportunity to achieve that equality. So a lot of
Thank,
it still falls on the individual, unfortunately.
I think we can find common ground on that, Dr.
I do too.
Washington,
I do
because
too.
that's upstream education, that
Hmm.
we cannot ignore that there are systemic barriers that are
That's
by
right.
design that create barriers for students. So absolutely, growing up in inner city Detroit, um, I experienced many barriers. And I do have that. I love that Englishes.
Hmm.
I'm back in my old stomping ground in my mom's house. As a matter of fact, this is where I am right now, in the snow. But I use my language variety, right, in communicating with my friends in my neighborhood, etc. And it is a form of, I call it currency. I can invest in those social relationships. However, if I didn't have the classroom variety, I wouldn't probably be on this webinar. And I was able to attain that in many very interesting ways. But it was not busing that did it, that's for sure. So,
Mhm.
it's just we have so many lessons that we need to learn from other attempts to create, um, I don't just say educational, I say educational excellence, not just equity, because some of our systems are equally poor, equally terrible, and not achieving what we need. It's excellence. And that is attained by addressing some of these barriers that are beyond even classroom instruction. So I'm with you, sis. I think you make an excellent point.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about what we're trying to accomplish with kids, African American kids in particular, we've when I think about some of the gains that we've made in things like the science of reading, AB 1454 passed in California last fall. Awesome. And I would say that the science of reading is absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient to achieve literacy equity. It is the foundation. It is not the whole answer. There are a lot of
There needs
other
to be.
things that we need to be doing. Hmm?
Yeah. And to that point, and you both have shared so many great points. Look at your initiative, unpack those three variables that Dr. White noted, evaluate your systems, looking at what are some possible barriers. Also, understanding that our students come with cultural, not just well, in addition to cultural assets, linguistic assets, and
Mhm.
utilizing and acknowledging those. And you've touched on some legislation, Dr. Washington, and just the year before, actually just this year, it's being implemented, but it's the legislation passed a couple of years, and now we are beginning to screen students in California K through 2 for risk of reading difficulties, including dyslexia. And so, screening is a first step. It gives you an idea of where your students are at. It helps inform instruction, best first instruction, intervention. Now, though, when we're implementing the legislation, when we're giving assess the screener and other assessments, and then when we're looking at the data and analyzing, what would both of you say are some critical considerations when we're implementing such things as screeners and assessments to ensure equitable implementation for our Black and African American students? And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Washington.
Um, I When I think about this screening, I can't help but go back to the statistic that you showed about overrepresentation. African American kids are already overrepresented on the special education caseload in California and many other states. The trap we don't want to fall into, there are two of them. One is having the screening inflate that number. And so, really understanding what risk actually means and what it looks like is absolutely critical. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm a speech pathologist, and I don't know how many speech pathologists there are on this call, but I have like a real memory of what happened with the American Speech and Hearing Association when we decided that universal hearing screenings was something we really needed to do. So when babies are born in the United States now, thanks to the effort of ASHA and others, they are screened for hearing impairment. But one of the things that we have learned is 70% of the kids who are identified at that time never get services. And so the kids who do get services are the ones we would have identified without that screening. Kids who are deaf or who have severe learning or severe hearing impairments. But those who have mild impairments that really impact their functioning in a classroom are the ones who are least likely to be identified and get services. That is not a trap we want to fall into with reading. So we're doing all this screening. What happens next?
Mm.
What happens next in schools? How does it relate to MTSS? So if we identify kids on these screeners who are having difficulty and they're African American, does our intervention start with tier one in the classroom? Or are we automatically identifying these kids for the next tier or the next tier? And so some of those things, I just think, as we're thinking about screening, they are absolutely important. The science of reading is critical as a foundation. I think beyond just the screening itself, we have to have a plan, especially with this population of students who struggle with reading a lot anyway. So when you look at the other statistic that you showed, where approximately 32% of African American kids are meeting the grade level
Great.
expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what, 68% who aren't? And are we going to snatch those kids in the net in a screening? And if we do, what are we going to do with them? What are we calling them? Where are we putting them? We have to have a plan. And the plan can't just be we disaggregate data for a reason. We also have to disaggregate the screening data so that we're not just taking um, sort of ballooning our identification of kids who end up in this special ed system. A lot of these kids are struggling with reading. Some of it is about the way we measure reading. Some of it is about the way that we approach reading. I loved listening to Helena
Mm-hmm.
because she's a wonderful poet. But when she talked about her story, the thing that really struck me about it was when she identified things that mattered to her, things that she cared about, things that she was motivated about, she came to appreciate literacy in a very different way. And so when we talk about these individual things we need to be concerned about, that's one of them. What are we asking kids to read? Are we paying attention to what their interests are? Are we paying attention to how culturally supportive they are? What are we doing with reading? We're getting these curricula from publishers that have these books in them that are about frogs and all kinds of things that may or may not be that interesting. Are we pushing publishers to publish things that are more appropriate for our kids locally or culturally or linguistically? If not, we can self-publish. We can publish our own things, but we need to think about what we're giving kids to read, what we expect from them, how much we respect what their interests are, and how we integrate their cultural language into our instruction. All of those things matter. We have a mutual friend who's from Kenya who started the Africa Dyslexia Organization. She wasn't a reader until she was 26, I think, but she could cook and she went to culinary school and she wanted to read cookbooks. That's when she became a reader at 26, when she went to culinary school. Before that, she wasn't a reader. Now she is an undying advocate for literacy because of her own experience. Once she found something that really mattered to her, she became a reader. So there are a lot of variables. That's not the only one, but there are a lot of variables that we need to think about. Once we teach kids the foundational skills, through phonemic, phonological awareness, those word reading abilities, what we're not doing is getting them from word reading to actually reading books. Reading words is not reading. Uh,
And what I'm appreciating with what you're sharing is, you're going back to um, the fact that we need to be careful with screening because it can impact the overrepresentation. And so being very careful with interpreting that data, understanding also that there needs to be a plan and a plan in place for what now, what's next once our
exactly.
students are screened. And our the legislation for screening does require that if a student is flagged at for risk, that they receive supports that meet the needs for which they were flagged for. Now, of course, this is a really large state, so we're seeing how that is being implemented across the state. So that's why I'm really glad actually to, and I'm hoping that it's okay. I can jump to the next question. And
No, no,
Dr.
no. You can't
Okay,
jump yet. No, ma'am.
okay,
Tracy
No.
wants to talk.
I've got
okay,
something to say here.
okay. Go ahead,
Okay.
and then
All right.
I'll ask my question.
Yes. Thank you for honoring that, Bonnie. You know, we have to look at the MTSS model as a guide and remember that there are behavioral supports and the best principals I've ever worked with, when they saw a Black kid who couldn't behave, they checked to see if they could read. And many times that child was functionally illiterate. So it is pure torture to sit in a classroom unable to read or to be warehoused in a special education classroom. That creates trauma for children.
Mhm.
And that is why we have a pipeline to prison. So if we follow the through line from failing at the multi-tiered system of support, it takes it right onto the prison system. Now, when we think about that and the idea of screening, it is to identify early with a system of prevention
That's
of
right.
literacy failure. And in practice, it should be prevention of teacher and educator failure. Now, in the systems I've had the pleasure of working with, State Department, district level, et cetera, we cannot support what we do not understand as leaders. We must be vulnerable and honest about what we do not know. The bane of the existence of Black students are adult egos, where people do not get the help they need, reach out to the experts and say, come and help me walk through this. We need systems where we're willing to be vulnerable because we end up wasting teachers' time, student time, and literally squandering the lives of so many people. So, with that in mind, I want to give this brief example. We had a group come to Houston where we had what I call a lighthouse campus when I was serving as the head of a nonprofit there based in Houston, focusing on the science of reading, right? Preparing dyslexia therapists. And they visited a majority English language learner or multilingual school where it had been taken over by the State Department and they totally transformed that school. They went from improvement required to a five-star school, which is the highest rating you can get. These are children who, many of them, their permanent housing, a hotel across the street. So poverty is not destiny. Did they have other barriers to learning? Sure, but those children were learning to read. Now, the visitors came from a majority AAE dialect speaking school. The thing that they had in common was poverty. 100% free and reduced lunch. What happens? They come, they visit, they experience it, then they go back and we start to implement. And what we did was we aligned coaching and support because we don't get good at anything without coaching. When we look at Mississippi, they had a cadre of expert coaches to support the rollout. Same thing for Alabama and the growth that they're experiencing. There are best practices. So we don't have to make the wheel over and over again, whether it's statewide or district wide. The outcome was this was the lowest performing school in the state of, the eighth lowest performing in the state of Ohio and the lowest performing in Akron Public Schools. They went from 70% or 74%-ish of their kids at tier three, all those children weren't dyslexic, to literally flipping the pyramid upside down and having 21% of their students performing at the highest levels of achievement for the first time in the history of that school. So back to the wonderful points that Dr. Washington made, we first need to understand the underlying science behind how we teach literacy. Then we can go deeper into those dynamics that have to do with the dialect the child is loved in so that we don't identify a kid as dyslexic when they have deep knowledge. We just haven't figured out how to assess for what they actually know. I learned that from Dr. Washington. So she's one of my go-to experts when I want to do the work in a way that is methodical and appropriate and sustainable. That's the other thing I'd add. When we build this system of support or we rebuild it, are we thinking about sustainability? Are we thinking about mid-course adjustments where we're looking at this formative assessment data and we're not just admiring the problem, we're making mid-course adjustments? That is crucial if we're going to plan that work and work that plan.
Let me follow that up then, Dr. White, because both you and Dr. Washington touched on next steps and what how do you flip what's happening in the classroom based on the data and based on what you're seeing? How what are those supports look like? And as you mentioned, Dr. Washington, are we going to start with best first instruction, or are we going to move directly into intervention? So my wondering to you is, what are some of the best elements when we get that data for best first instruction, for supplemental intensified supports? What are some of those things that need to be done so we're promoting literacy development that honors linguistic diversity, fosters culturally responsive connections that ensure equitable outcomes for our Black and African American students? What do our administrators need to do? What do our teachers need to do? And even what do our parents need to do?
Um, are you
Yeah,
asking me?
yes.
Okay. So I'm looking at anonymous attendees. I've been answering people. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I have been. But someone in here says language and culture are different. And they are. And that is, as we talk about this issue, that's something that I think is really important. And we're finding that it's particularly important with assessments. And so, as we're thinking about doing screenings, this is not just about language, it's about culture. One of the things that we are starting to see so much of in our assessment that we're having to backtrack and actually starting to analyze and write about is that a lot of the responding that we see on our instruments is cultural responding. And because the instruments weren't set up to think about the language and culture of the kids who, well, some of them are looking at language now. So, we talk about African American English. People are like, oh, we know what the features are. And, we know that we shouldn't be penalizing kids for that. I'm like, yeah, but even in addition to um, the language, the cultural language features, we're seeing a lot of cultural language responding. Things where a lot of the kids are saying the same thing and it's not the answer that the test was looking for. And so some of that for me, and this also speaks to something someone else said in here. If you give an instrument in a school and a significant number of the kids in the school do really poorly, you can decide that most of the kids in the school are at risk, or you can decide you have a problem with your instrument. And I'm somebody who I teach my students this. If we give an instrument and most of the kids can't do it, the problem's not the kids, it's the instrument. Because all we're capturing is what they can't do, not what they can do. And so we are testing their performance on an instrument that's probably not good for them instead of their competence in the skill that we're trying to test. And so it's going to be really important with these assessments that you look at the data that you're getting out of these schools and not mischaracterize the school and the classroom, and instead step back and say, at the item level, what kind of answers are we getting? Why are so many kids in this school struggling with this? Is this really an at-risk issue for the school, or have we chosen an assessment that doesn't work well with this population? And if that's true, what do we need to do? That's the first thing with the assessment. Assessments are a huge issue for us. So many kids look really poor on assessments. And then when I have a student who was interested in syntax, so he sentences. And so he gave this syntax assessment. And the African American kids that we tested, approximately 80% of them scored at the mean or the average or below. So they were scoring really poorly. Then we went back to the model and we put cultural language into the model, and then all the kids scored at the mean or above. And
Mm.
so the instrument, by not paying attention to the way that kids were using language, was mischaracterizing them and identifying them as having language risk. And so we need to be sure with the instruments that we're choosing that we keep looking at the data to make sure that it's telling us what we think it's telling us and not something that we need to be paying attention to in a different way. So I know you asked me about the teaching, but I want to step back and we're assessing first, then we're teaching. The
Yeah.
assessments have to work well for the students with whom they are being used. And I know that there are some assessments that school districts are starting to choose in order to meet the requirements for this bill. And I hope that as they are doing that, that each one of those assessments um, it is resulting in somebody who's overseeing what happened, what the data look like, and whether they're actually doing their job. Just because it's published doesn't mean it's right.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. White right now, but I think, well, I completely agree regarding the assessments. I also, though, believe that in addition to evaluating your assessments, you have to evaluate your instruction because
Yes,
it could be a little bit of both, right?
that's right.
Where your instruction, especially your best first instruction, your universal instruction, that might need to be evaluated if you're
That's
starting to
right.
see that you have this all too many kids who are being flagged at risk.
That's right. And so I like that because I'm saying the assessment, you're saying the teacher. Both of us are not blaming it on the kids.
Yep, that
That's
too.
what's
Yep,
important.
that is. What are your thoughts, Dr. White?
And we're not blaming it on the parents either.
Right.
So I want to reference back to the same example and tell you what happened because when we started working with Helen Arnold Elementary, that totally reversed the course of their school. The parents during COVID were starting to experience instruction, the same system that had failed them. Now they're sitting next to their students and they're going, wait a minute, I never learned this because we started working with them in January 2020. And you know what happened after that?
Hmm.
Well, once they started coming back face to face, the very first parent night was bursting at the seams, overflowing with parents. And what did they want to know? Is there any way you can bring adult literacy to our school? Because I never learned this. They were asking for it. I saw in the chat a question about what about parents the system failed? Let's get out of the box and creative and create models like that one. Because that way you're hitting multiple generations and making wrong things right. Secondly, parents have language that they can transfer to children, rich language. This whole 30 million word gap research was very biased in that when researchers come into a home of Black parents and they're taking notes, I mean, who's going to feel all cozy with that model and want to just say everything on your mind? Well, don't fall for it. In actuality, the parents were more guarded in their speech. So we want to create conditions where parents feel safe, where they understand the assets that they have that are transferable to their student. Even if it's a picture book, they can create stories and they're still building language for their students. And I want to ask Julie, if you wouldn't mind referencing, you told me the experience you had with translanguaging in Africa, where you remember how you were telling me about the students were asking if they could speak in their home their home language, and then I think that is such a powerful example.
Yes. So, and we had a similar experience in Oakland actually when
Oh, I
we were
want to hear
doing
this.
intervention. Yes.
Okay.
But one, I don't know how many people know about translanguaging, but it's the idea of giving kids access to their entire linguistic repertoire when they're learning something that um, is language based, like reading, writing, and even mathematics. And translanguaging is a concept that came from bilingualism, actually. It was Ophelia Garcia at New York University who talked about how important it was to give kids access to everything they know about language because they are experts in whichever language they came to school with. And when they're learning language-based skills like reading and writing, they need access to their expertise, their expert language, in order to learn this new one. School is a different speech community, and so kids have to learn that language too, but they need the other language to learn the new one. That's one of the lessons we learned from Spanish speaking kids in this country. And so I always give this example of translanguaging when it was the best example I've ever seen. I was in a rural community in South Africa working with kids who were in middle school. And we were doing this camp where we were focused on improving your self-efficacy for college because these are kids whose parents haven't gone to college, they don't have a lot of access to literacy, and you too can go to college was the idea of camp. And so as the language person, my focus was on um, oral language in an academic context. So the kids were doing speeches and we were talking about how to critique people in a way that's productive and constructive. And so at the end, we had like a competition where you could get up and um, have this like short speech that you gave using all the things that we learned, put them together, and then the kids decided who did it the best. And so the first little girl who got up, she's about 11, she got up and she got ready, and then she looked at me and said, "Can I do it in my language first?" And I said, "Sure." And so she did the whole speech in Sapedi, which was the language in her village first. Then she looked at me and said, "Now I'm ready." And she did it
Mm,
perfectly in English. And so she needed her own home language to support what she was trying to do. And one of the best researchers, I think, outside of Ophelia at NYU in translanguaging is actually in South Africa. His name is Leketi Makalela. And one of the things he says is one language is incomplete without the other. So whatever system you're learning to use in the classroom is incomplete for you as a speaker unless you use the other language to help you learn it. And that is a mistake that we have made with African American kids. I must say, when I think about my own um, journey as a language scientist and the way that we talk about dialect and reading and what it is that we need to be doing, we used to talk about code switching a lot. And in
mhm,
fact, in my early years, I worked with actually LAUSD, where they had a program that was focused on academic English mastery, and it was really focused on code switching. And, fast forward, several decades, and I would never support teaching kids to code switch in a classroom.
mm. Now that wouldn't be something that you
No,
would.
no.
What would you encourage? The translanguaging, cross-linguistic
Yes,
transfers?
what I would encourage you is to leave them alone. Let them use their own language system to support what they're learning. And then our job is not to teach code switching, it's to teach reading. And
Mhm,
what we saw when we went to Oakland, because we went into a classroom in Oakland, and it's just a pilot project, and we want to do it bigger for all y'all who are on this call. But we went in and we got students who are taught to read using the science of reading. So, Tracy, you said earlier it's torture not to be able to read. It's also torture to be able to read words and still not understand text. So,
frustrating.
so these kids knew they could read words, but they still didn't understand books. And so we had this hypothesis that teachers understand that reading is a language skill, but kids don't understand it. That if you can talk, you can read. And so we went in and said, "You talk so much," and these black kids they were fourth, fifth, and sixth graders talking about each other, like all this playfulness that they have with oral language. I'm like, let's take some of that and transfer it to books and take what you know about oral language and the way you use rhythm and the way you use all this artfulness, and let's transfer it to your books. And we were working on fluency and comprehension. At the end of 8 weeks, we had kids who talked about when they got there, "Oh no, this is reading. This is the third time I've been in one of these classes. I hate this." By the end of 8 weeks, we're like, "I can read." They saw themselves as readers. And what they said to us was, "I like how we can talk how we talk."
Mm.
and then read. And it made so much difference. And so the hypothesis was true that once kids understood the connection between their oral language and the written system, and we didn't get in their way of using their oral system to master the written system, they actually learned it. And so I, mea culpa, in 2026, say, let them do it. Support them, don't suppress them. Don't suppress the use of the home language. Let kids use the language that they need to use in order to get meaning from text.
Thank you for that. That was powerful. Get out of their way, let them use their language
Yep, get
and
out of the
build
way.
on
Yep,
and build
build
on
on it. And your job is to support them as they build on it.
it. Yeah, to give them the tools as you were
Yep.
talking. And I'll put in a shameless plug for our literacy roadmaps content blocks, which were developed and released this last May. And in each one of our sections, because it's broken down by 4 different areas: language, foundational skills, integrated reading and writing, and comprehensive ELD, which includes both integrated and designated ELD. And in each one of our sections, we talk about dialect variations, acknowledging those, as well as using cross-linguistic transfers and translanguaging to support students.
That's
So I'm
very
glad that
good.
there's alignment with what we're
Yes.
talking about today.
Well,
And
and one of the things Tracy said, I just want to say one more thing because I know that there's somebody out here is thinking this. So Tracy said she learned to use the language of school and that's why she's here. Somebody out here is thinking, but yes, they have to be able to learn, they have to be able to use the other code. Turns out if you learn how to read, you learn how to code switch.
because you understand the different
Yes.
levels of conversation.
Yep. And you're learning a different code as you're reading. And so
Mhm.
we see kids as they're learning the written code, also using that code in oral language. You don't have to do anything really explicit in order to make that happen for most kids. For a few kids, you will, but most kids will learn to use the language of school by learning to read and write and engage in school
I'm going to
Thank you.
bridge from that.
without our interference. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I do just want to be cautious of time because I have one more question for you both, and we have probably 5 more minutes.
And I'm going to let Tracy start because I've been running my mouth. Go, Tracy.
You're getting a lot of hearts, girl. It's working. Yes, Miss Bonnie. What's next? What do you want to ask?
No, were you going to say something
I
there,
want
Bonnie?
to make sure I honor your last question, whatever
Yeah.
that was you
Well,
want to.
this might lend itself to what you were just going to share, and that is because this will be our last question, and then we'll get into our Q&A. What is one key piece of advice that you would give districts and schools to keep equity and culturally responsive practices at their heart of their literacy initiatives, at the heart of their literacy goals, and of their literacy work to ensure that our Black and African American students are being set up for success?
Number one, the superintendent needs to be talking about it because if the superintendent is talking about it, then it's important. Secondly, there needs to be a simple way to brand it in a way that people get the big idea, why this is the collective moonshot. Third, role specifically, every individual in the system needs to know from the bus driver to the superintendent how to support this focus. And often that's the work that doesn't get done. There's an initiative, it's pushed out, it's sort of brace yourself, Bertha, here we go. And then people are already overwhelmed and they're like, okay, here we go. Again, what's this initiative? This too shall pass. But we need to captivate people's imaginations about what this vision is and how they get to be a part of it. In building it out, we need a cross section of stakeholders involved in the building of this thing. So it's not done to them, it's done with them. And your ambassadors of change are the people in your school community or your community that people respect and listen to and who are actually about not just admiring problems, but about action, because people will listen to them and follow them. So It's not about a top down, it's an all hands on deck model. Another big problem is if we do this in silos. That's why I respect, for example, the work of speech pathologists. They can often identify these issues very early, particularly for children who may be dyslexic. The school psychologist, are they aware of this science-based approach and their role in it? And are they equipped to win at helping with this? Everyone needs to be a part of the solution. And Bonnie, you asked earlier about parents. Parents need to be able to understand how their student is faring as compared to others and their growth. They deserve to understand what this data means. So again, it's not done to their child, but with them and their child. So it's about a very coherent approach that involves all oars in the water, and it takes a lot of planning, but it can be done.
From what I'm hearing you say, it needs to be done collectively. It's a with, not a two, a four, or an
Yes,
at.
exactly.
What about you, Dr. Washington?
I actually don't have much to add. I agree completely. The first thing I wrote down was when you asked the question was actually what Tracy said. And that is the first thing is you have to believe it's important, because it starts with that belief, and at the leadership level. And when you were talking, Tracy, it made me think about Mississippi. One of the things people talk about the Mississippi miracle, it was not a miracle. It was an alignment from the state house to the schoolhouse.
Hmm.
They aligned from the top all the way down. The community bought in. As they started to see results, everybody got on board. And the state, I came here from Georgia. When I was in Georgia, if you'd said, wow, Georgia's number 45 in literacy in the country, the response was always the same. Well, thank God for Mississippi because we'll never be number 50. Well, nobody can say that anymore because Mississippi's
Yeah.
number 21. And so there's a bunch of people behind them now, but they started like you are. It's starting in Sacramento, and it started there in Jackson, and it had to go through the state. Everybody had to agree that it was important, and they agreed on an approach. And that's how they did it.
I feel
One
like we could go ahead.
One other point about Mississippi, before they launched this big initiative of their literacy coaches and the training of teachers, I had the privilege of speaking with university professors from across the state about this initiative. So part of their very logical approach was to ensure that the teacher pipeline would be addressed. And the Barksdale Institute partnered with Kimyana Berg, who was really the spearhead of the change there in the state. And
Mhm.
as a result, they were bought in as well. Why wait until teachers are apprenticed in a model that is not going to set them up for success? And again, I see this as a real problem nationally. Deal with that university dynamic,
Right.
prepare the pipeline, prepare the leaders, prepare the teachers with proper coaching. That's the through line that creates sustainable change.
Thank you. And I feel like we could, I mean, I have another two questions here for you, but we have run out of time, and we could really dig deeper. And I see that there's a bit of questions in the chat. So because of time, I want to ask one question. And I don't know if Nancy, you're able to pop on screen and maybe share one burning question that you've seen going through the Q&A.
Lots of burning questions, but I'll pitch one to you. And that is, what about students coming from countries, immigrants from Brazil or Dominican Republic who are Black and also speak a language other than English, other than African American English?
I saw that question. And when I say African American, I'm talking about African descendants of slaves. But that is because that's who I study. Because I'm very aware that every Black person who comes from another country speaks a dialect that is not African American English because it is the dialect of another language, right? And so wherever there are languages, there are dialects. And so those Black students who are coming from, like we're starting to see in at ASHA now, people who are studying a lot of the dialects from the islands. So Jamaican Creoles, Guyanese Creoles. And so there are people who are studying those areas. And so there are a lot of Black children who come from different language backgrounds other than American English who are speaking a dialect from another country or another language. And we need to recognize that. I did notice, Bonnie, when we had our run through that you kept saying Black and African American. And it's a recognition that not all Black students are African American. And so their dialects, their cultures, all those things are different. And so my view as a scientist and a practitioner is we have a responsibility to know who's sitting in front of us and to meet the needs of the child who's in front of us and not to group kids in a way where we are scooping up kids for whom the things we're talking about are not appropriate. And so, yes, it's incumbent upon us as educators to recognize who our kids are, where they come from, how that impacts oral language, what culture that brings with it, and what we need to do as a result of it. And so, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's very important.
Let me see if I see another one in here. I think we have time for one more. What would you suggest if there is an adopted curriculum that is strong in science of reading? And by the way, we are currently in the process of a follow-up adoption here in California for ELA, ELD. So I think that this is a pretty timely question. What would you suggest if there is an adopted curriculum that is strong in science of reading, but has knowledge units that are not culturally responsive and to some are not age appropriate and Eurocentrically focused, but expected to be taught as is?
Hmm.
The answer nobody wants to hear, push back. I mean, you really do need to push back. I have a lot, and actually, when Tracy and I met, she was working with a publishing company. We both were, with Scholastic.
Mhm.
And I stopped working with them because they weren't culturally appropriate. And anybody who knows me knows I told them that on the way out the door. This is not appropriate. You're not thinking about all kids. It's too Eurocentric. Um, It's too nuclear family centric. What about the kids who have different family structures? What about the kids who are homeless? What about all this? It's all so focused on a segment of America that almost doesn't even exist anymore. And they just are not changing. Tracy knows I talk about weird science all the time. Weird, and I'm going to say it quickly. It is an acronym that the American Psychological Association put together in 2010. It means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Those nations make up 12% of the world's population and 80% of the research participants. So the standards we have, the benchmarks we have, the expectations we have are not based on the kids who are sitting in front of us. Curricula, publishing is built on weird science. It's not built necessarily on the kids in the classroom. Push back, make them responsive to you, make Bonnie responsive to you, make everybody responsive to the needs of your kids.
Starting
That's
a
how you do it.
revolution. Yes. And I agree. And I would also add, find your village.
Yes.
Do not try to do this alone. I want to highlight a upcoming conference. Dr. Washington and I are both on the board for the Black Literacy Matters conference. It's coming up on March 11th through the 14th, and it's going to be at Norfolk State University. Very intentionally. It's called Boots on the Ground. And it's because the anti-Black literacy history of this country started right there in Virginia. So it's very intentional, and it is one of the most amazing conferences you will ever attend. This is the third conference, and you will find people who have access to resources so you can supplement your curriculum and find things that are evidence aligned and a network to support you in your journey to advance Black literacy.
Thank you. And one thing I will add to that as a way that folks can push back is when they go through their curriculum adoptions and
Yes.
the process that they take and the criteria that they use at their own districts. And it reminds me of what you shared earlier, Dr. White, and that is it has to start from the top, from a district superintendent, and the vision needs to be there and the direction needs to be there. And that needs to trickle down even to the adoption of materials. So I want to thank you both for your time today. I am so glad that we finally were able to have this webinar, and I so appreciate you. And if there's another opportunity for us to connect, please reach out to me, and I know we'll be reaching out to you as well.
It was
I
a
am.
pleasure. Absolutely.
Absolutely happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
And
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to all you VIP educators. You are very important professionals. I know you rarely hear that, but thank you for what you do.
Yes. And thank you to the interpreter. We know how hard that job is.
I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to just quickly just mention the resources that we have. We won't have time to go through them, but then she will highlight some pertinent points, and I'm going to stop talking so she can go ahead and do that. Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you so much, Dr. White Whedon and Dr. Washington. It was very inspirational. You have a list of resources, the link to which was provided to you in the chat. Please take a look at them, and it includes a Google folder that has our resources and our PowerPoint slides. So some of the things that we are not going to spend time sharing with you will be provided for you there. There is lots of good work in the equity leads and documents that they've created, and we have more webinars coming up, and there's a list of them with registration information provided for you as well. So thank you for being here today. Bonnie, we have 2 minutes left, and I think we've all been energized and inspired.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I want to thank everyone for your time today. As Deputy McGee mentioned earlier today, there will continue to be webinars that are focused on Black student achievement. So please be on the lookout for those. We will definitely be sharing those on our end. And again, thank you for your time. I completely agree with Dr. Tracy Whedon White. You are VIP teachers, and we appreciate you, and all educators. We appreciate you and your time. You have a great evening, and we will see you soon.